One of the best things about the Umbrella Academy over the years was quite literally the Umbrella Academy. The siblings that were part of Sir Reginald Hargreeves' gifted children made the show extremely entertaining to watch. Whether that be their individual personality traits, their powers, their differences, the arguments that they'd have, but most importantly, the unity that they'd often have when they'd need to fight off another apocalypse at the end of a season. This was present throughout Season 1 to Season 3 of the show. However, within Season 4, it felt like all prior character work that had been established over the 30 hours that we had was thrown out of the window and was never seen again. All because, for the sake of 6 episodes and the luxury of being able to finish a show, something that's kind of rare today, everything seemed to be forgotten in its rushed state. So I thought I'd take a look at the characters in the Umbrella Academy and explain why they were ruined in the final season. So let's get into it. Here is how the Umbrella Academy ruined its characters. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The first thing I want to address before delving into the individual characters is the siblings as a whole. For the most part of Season 4, there was no real sense of unity there, other than when they first embarked on the mission of finding Jennifer. Outside of that, many of them were just doing pointless side quests that didn't amount to anything or move the overall plot forward in the slightest. Meaning no development in terms of their relationships were made. It was almost just a way of keeping them busy whilst Viktor and Reginald actually looked to prevent the cleanse from occurring, which was the main plot in the show. That's my first major issue. Sir Reginald Hargreeves. This was a destruction of a character that I was utterly disappointed with. The Season 3 finale really did allude to the fact that in Season 4, Reginald was going to be the major villain in the final season. The fact that he'd reset the universe, exactly like he wanted to do, and was standing at the top of the tower which was overlooking his own empire, showed that he had everything pretty much how he wanted it to be. Throughout the first 3 seasons, there was mystery about Reginald. We saw that he'd been around for years, was an alien that was disguised as a human, and had ulterior motives that we were hoping to eventually find out about. However, all of that character building, mystery, and trauma that he put the children through was ultimately for nothing. As within this season of the show, Reginald was the weakest, unintelligent, the least intimidating, and a shell of the person that we came to learn the backstory of. There were so many questions that many of us had throughout the 4 seasons that were never addressed. We never found out Reginald's origin. We never got to see what his true appearance looked like in alien form, something which would have been incredible to see after all of those years. And we also never saw him become the villain that I feel the original trajectory of the show was leading towards. I think if the show didn't get cancelled and was given 10 episodes in its final season, then maybe we would have seen him become this villain that the Umbrella Academy needed to stop. You could argue that we kind of got that in Season 3, but that just felt like the taking down of his metaphorical mask and him showing the children that he was in fact something else and that he did have a dark side to him. With him being at the top of the tower, it almost insinuated that he was going to be the most powerful that he'd ever been, but in reality, it was the complete opposite. Granted, we saw him reconcile with Viktor and give him closure, and we also found out that Reginald was responsible for killing Ben all of those years ago, but it just wasn't enough, especially when the potential for the character was so high. 5. This is another character that was given poor treatment. The thing with 5 is that in the early seasons, it was always going to be more entertaining, because at the time, I think the actor was about 15 years old. So it was humorous seeing a 15-year-old looking like a kid, but acting the age of somebody that had the mental age that was considerably older than everybody else. But the charm of it wasn't where the issue lied in Season 4. 5 was once this extremely intelligent, harsh, truth-speaking individual that didn't really care for feelings, and was always about the bettering of the universe and stopping the apocalypse. But in all honesty, within this season, it feels like they dumbed him down and turned him into a bit of a simple character. The old 5 would have clocked onto the fact that the CIA were involved in the conspiracy cult, the Keepers, and it's something his judgment would have worked out pretty quickly, rather than him not having any idea in this season of the show. Plus, I know we're all on the same page about this, the love interest that he formed with Lila. It was just so unnecessary, unbelievable, and it didn't make any sense at all. 5 betrayed his brother Diego, something that would have never happened in the past. Plus, both of the siblings ended up dying whilst being mad with one another, and with no forgiveness being present, something which went against the very core of the show. The fact that they were a family and they were always there for one another no matter what. Plus, 5 was also prepared to stay in a different timeline and not prevent the cleanse so that he could be with Lila, something that went against every fibre of the character's being. It was just extremely confusing to try and understand what motivated him in this season of the show. 5 was once my favourite character in the Umbrella Academy, but in this season, the writers did him dirty. And not only did he not get up to some of the most exciting adventures and have the in-depth comedic conversations that nobody else could, he barely used his powers and, like Reginald, was a shell of who he once knew. Luther. There were many issues with Luther in this season as well. Luther was once the leader of the Umbrella Academy. He was number 1. But in this season, they really dumbed him down and just turned him into a bit of comedic relief. They also did this with Diego and Klaus too. They didn't really give him a story or any kind of plot to really establish. One main issue as well lied with the fact that he didn't seem to mourn his wife Sloane, and it was something that was never really addressed. I understand that it had been several years when we re-met them, but I feel like he should have been questioning why it was that she didn't make it through the reset with them, considering the Sparrow Academy version of Ben did. Luther was besotted with Sloane, and I feel like we missed out on a whole chapter of him grieving the love of his life, something which would have allowed us to understand a completely different side to the character, and it would have added a needed emotional edge to this season of the show. Maybe if there were more episodes in the early part of the season, we might have seen how it impacted him. We never saw him lead the family at any point in this season, and then right at the end of the season as they were about to die, when he said that they should go around and tell each other reasons as to why they loved one another, it was simply just laughed off, showing that emotion was clearly something that the showrunners wanted to remove from the final season. Alison. Alison's character arc kinda made no sense in this season. Throughout the entirety of season 3, we saw that she betrayed her family in the most horrific way possible, something which actually led to Luther and Klaus being killed. She did that so she could get back to Ray and Claire, but within this season, all was just forgiven with the attendance of a birthday party, and bygones were just bygones. Something that I just didn't think was the right approach at all. Plus, the divorce with Ray felt so shoehorned in as well, because they loved each other a lot when we last saw them. Alison probably felt like one of the more isolated characters in this season of the show, as it felt like she was primarily with either Klaus or Claire. As well, she didn't really get to use her powers that much, and to be honest, they were probably the coolest that we'd ever seen them. She no longer needed to say, "I heard a rumor," so she was extremely powerful and could operate from a distance, but they were never really exhibited. Diego. With regards to Diego, within this season, they kinda just made him this CIA-obsessed individual that all of a sudden had an interest in becoming an agent, despite being somebody that had superhuman abilities, something which was far cooler. We saw him struggling following becoming a father, his marriage deteriorating, and him also losing his powers, and that was an interesting arm of his story. But again, the in-depth character focus wasn't really delved into that much, and we saw it just being brushed over at points. I'd even say that it wasn't properly resolved at the end, because I couldn't tell you what state the marriage was in. When Lila left, there wasn't an emotional goodbye, and I don't feel like they even properly reconciled following her being with his brother. Diego was once this cool character, and they turned him into this middle-aged suburban father stereotype. Viktor. One thing that I don't understand about Viktor is that they went from pretty much being one of the most powerful individuals that there could possibly be and feeling like a real threat at any given moment to feeling pretty weak in the final season. Even with different powers, they were still the strongest by far due to the energy that they could control. Viktor once had so much conflict inside of their mind over the way that they were treated by Reginald, and granted, we did see that get addressed in this season. But considering how powerful they are, I thought we'd see it being exhibited in some way, especially during the final battle. Viktor was always at the core of the apocalypses, whether it be in Season 1 or in Season 2 with Harlan. But this time round, they were almost just like some kind of investigator along with Reginald, and their arc had no depth to it whatsoever. It was just being a passenger in the car. I feel Viktor should have been able to put up more of a fight against the Cleanse, but it was very underwhelming. Klaus. Klaus was the biggest letdown for me this season. He was a joke of a character. All of the personal development that they did with him from Season 1 to Season 3 and seeing why he was like the way that he was just removed. And they treated him like he was some comedic relief whilst putting him on his own for the most part. When he was working with the gangster, not only was that a part of the story that was quite boring to follow, but it just didn't contribute to the wider plot at all. If anything, it was something that was more focused on just repairing Klaus and Alison's relationship. Then, when he was inside of the coffin and buried, that was also something that I just felt was pointless and didn't need to be included, as it made him even more isolated than any other character. His stories and involvements genuinely amounted to nothing, and he went from this germaphobe who they almost wanted us to laugh at due to his behaviour, to somebody that was just on his own and had no real purpose. Not for the benefit of the story though, almost just to give him something to do. Ben. Ben was arguably the main sibling in this season, as he was with Jennifer and was causing the cleanse to occur, but outside of that, there wasn't really that much development there. Ben betrayed his siblings at the start by giving them Marigold, and then just went off and formed a connection with Jennifer, ultimately transforming into the monster and causing the apocalypse. There was a nice moment at the end when he pushed Viktor out of the way, but the thing is, with Ben, I always found it difficult to connect or see him on the same level as the others because this wasn't the Ben that they grew up with. This was the version from the Sparrow Academy, who in all honesty wasn't really that nice of a person. We actually got to see Ben exhibit his powers at points, and that made for some entertaining moments, as some of the kills that he got were absolutely brutal. That paired with the fact that he probably had the most development probably makes him one of the more interesting characters in this season, which is saying something. Pogo. There was no Pogo in this timeline, which was something which I would have loved to have seen. We got a flashback, but that was all, so I was disappointed in that. Where was he? The lack of depth in the characters this time round was a major letdown. That and also the fact that we barely got to see them exhibit any of their powers. Their powers were the strongest that they'd ever been, for the most part, and considering the show is about superheroes and their powers, it just felt as though it was absent. It's a shame that the final season of the show wasn't only a letdown in terms of its plot, but also the fact that the characters that we came to connect with were unrecognizable. So, there you have it, how the Umbrella Academy ruined its characters. If you want to see a video where I discuss the downfall of the show, then click on the card in the top corner. Thanks for tuning into the video. If you enjoyed it, then hit subscribe. I'll catch you in the next one.